Hey, Aaron Rabinowitz here for RedGiantTV.com. In this very special 50th episode of Red Giant TV, we'll celebrate by having Red Giant's own Harry Frank show you how to destroy the city of Los Angeles through an alien attack. He'll explore compositing, 2D and 3D tracking, color correction, and visual effects techniques that will blow your mind. And speaking as a New Yorker whose town always seems to take the brunt of alien attacks and natural disasters in film, I say thank you, Mr. Frank. It is about frickin' time. Let's get to it.
Today, we're going to go through a pretty fun tutorial where I take out my frustrations on downtown Los Angeles. It's nothing personal against the good people of Los Angeles. They're very kind, very genuine, and they're great drivers. So nothing personal. I just had this aerial shot of Los Angeles from another project, and I started to play with it using a new camera tracker plugin from the Foundry. And ultimately, this is what I came up with, and I had a lot of fun with it. So there's a lot of lightning bolts and lasers and stuff like that. So like I mentioned, there's camera tracking going on. There's some sky replacement, some atmosphere effects, some 3D flying saucers. And actually, if you look, if I back this up a little bit, you'll see there's some roto work that needs to happen with the buildings, which is fairly complex, but actually is pretty simple to do with Mocha. The first thing I'm going to do is actually track the scene using the Foundry's tracker. So create a new comp here just to show you how this works. I'm going to drop my stock clip in here, and this is the original clip here. I'm going to trim it up just a little bit. So I'll start about right here. I'm going to tap B and then go around to the other side. And I want to make sure that I can still see enough of the other side of the shot where I can see a good amount of the ground area. We're going to need this to sort of align the scene with the ground horizon of the shot. And what I want to do is apply the Foundry's camera tracker. Now, if you'd like to download a demo of this, you can just go to the Foundry's site, go to Products, select Camera Tracker. You can read all about it. Go through the tutorials. I'll be giving you a pretty basic overview. You can also download a free trial, and you'll get a 15-day license for your computer. So back to After Effects, it's pretty much a 3-step process, kind of a 3.5-step process. We track, we solve, then we create the scene, which consists of a camera parented to a null. After that, we actually have to do some tweaking and aligning, but first things first, we need to track. So if we select the clip and we hit track, actually, we need to make sure that our footage is at full resolution. So set it to full and hit track. Now this is a 1080 clip, it's 18 seconds long, it's pretty lengthy, but I'm not gonna make you sit through and watch me do this or tell jokes while this tracks 18 seconds backward and forward. I'm gonna jump to the tracked version here. Oops, I named these backwards, this is not a resolved. We'll call this the tracked version here. So all I've done is let the tracker play out from beginning to end. So next thing I want to do with the tracking data that we've got is actually solve the shot. So it's going to give you a little pop-up, and it gives you some information here. This reprojection error, the best thing I can say about this from what I know is that the lower the number, the better. So I've solved, and now I'm going to create a scene using the data that the tracker has tracked. For a visual reference, I'm going to add a ground plane. So let's go to New, Solid, call this Ground. I'm going to use a very large solid, 3000 by 3000, and we'll hit OK, make this 3D. I'm going to apply Generate, Grid. I'll set this to width and height sliders so I can set these to evenly spaced squares, and I'll set the border to 2. And let's rotate this -90 so it's actually aligned with where the ground should be. And as you can see, it's not exactly aligned. I'm going to set this to a 3rd resolution just so I can scrub through this a little easier. It's close, but the camera really, the camera tracker, and any tracker really, can always figure out relative data, but it doesn't exactly know what's going on with regard to your horizon line. But this is pretty easy to fix. So I'm going to turn this ground plane off for the moment, select my camera tracker plugin, and what I want to do is get to a point where I can see quite a bit of the ground plane and points along the ground plane. So like these points out here, off in the distance. So I can select these points, and let's say some points out here. I'm just holding down the shift key to select multiple points. And I got like a little parking lot going on down here, so I can grab some of those. And let's see. Grab a point right here. So what I can do is use all these points to define where the ground plane should align. The ground plane will run through all these points. So I'm going to go to the camera tracker menu down here in the bottom left and go to ground plane and say set to selected. So what this has to do is go through and realign all of the data. It shows the points that I had selected and used as the ground plane, and it leaves those highlighted for us. I'm going to turn that ground plane back on, and looks like we're getting pretty close. Now our rotation is off just a little bit, but this is something we can easily fix by just using the null object. Now you notice when I rotate it, it's rotating about a point of interest that is not really in the center of the city. So it would help out if we could actually realign that center point, and that's what I'm going to do. So my center point, I'm going to make right about in here, kind of where the camera is pivoting around. So if I select this camera tracker plugin again, and I scrub through this, I see a couple points right here that seem to be on the ground and about in the center where I would like my point of origin to be. So I'm going to leave that point selected. I'm going to go to ground plane and select set origin. So now if I zoom back out, we can see that this null object is now aligned to the center of the scene. And it's actually aligned right to that point that I selected. So what I'm going to do is take that point and give it a little bit of rotation to align it with the scene. Now, this is where it's useful to have the ground plane visible, because if I rotate this, the camera's parented to it. So I'm never going to see any rotation, because the camera is moving right along with the null object. So I'm going to turn this ground plane back on. And there's actually a point where we can kind of see straight up this road right here. And if I select the camera tracker null object, I can rotate this to kind of realign my scene. So I'm going to basically put my focus on these roads here, and to see that the grids actually align with where the roads are. It seems to be doing a pretty good job. Now we have a lot of these distracting buildings that are kind of throwing off the perspective, but really what I'm focusing on is how parallel the roads are to my grid. And throughout the shot, they seem to hold up pretty well. So I'm going to call that good. Now, at this point, what I would suggest is that you get rid of the camera tracker, or at least have a working version where you purge out the camera tracker, because all that data is stored in the camera tracker plugin cache somewhere, but that somewhere is inside your project file. So you notice all I've done is I've actually made a couple comps here. In fact, let me delete this comp 1 here. That was a sort of dummy version. And I have a tracked version and a resolved version that I had for reference. And you'll notice that the file size is already at 15.3 megabytes. So I'm going to save a copy of this, just so I have that one if I ever want to go back to it. I'm happy with this tracked version here. I'm going to reduce the project, get rid of anything else that's in here. And in here, because I've already created the camera and all that good stuff, I'm going to get rid of the camera tracker plugin and save. Now we'll see that this file size 221K versus about 7 megabytes per composition that I had the camera tracker plug in it. And I think we're good to go with this in terms of adding some elements that react in 3D. Now, I'm going to do a sky replacement here. And what I'm going to use to create the sky is trap code horizon. So if I create a new solid, let's call this horizon. And let's make this the size of the comp. I'm working at 1920 by 1080. And let's go to Effect, Trap Code, Horizon. And I'm going to put this behind the footage. I'm going to use a duplicate of this footage and use that as a track mat. So if I go down here, switch this to my my modes, I'm going to tell this to use that layer as a luma mat. So what we're seeing right now is this horizon, and I'm using the luminance because the sky is brighter and the buildings are darker. I'm using the luminance to basically pull a key for my horizon. So now I have this sort of murky horizon image on top, but we'll fix the horizon image. Before I do that, I want to adjust the contrast of this image to pull a better key from it. So I'm going to go and use levels for this. I'm going to crush the levels down just a little bit. And I'm actually going to apply it to the right layer. I'm going to apply it to the image. So I want to crush the levels of the video. So next, I'm going to import a image of some rain clouds. I got these off of iStock. I'll drop these into my comp and go to Horizon, go to the image map section and select the rain clouds as my background. Now I need to align these a little bit better than that. The move that we've got here is just about a full 180 move from one side to the other. So that's a pretty good indication that we're going to need to map at least 180 degrees of horizontal coverage with this image. Now vertical coverage will kind of adjust on the fly. And then in the Y rotation, I'm just going to rotate this around so that it kind of fills the view here. So from one extreme on one side, this fills the screen. In fact, here at the beginning is where we want to really check. So I was going to move that over there. I'm going to hold down Shift and 1 to drop a marker there, and then Shift 2 here at the end. 1 and 2 from one extreme to the other. And looks like we've got it. Now, I'd like to add just a little bit more detail into these clouds. So I'm actually going to select the rain clouds. I'm going to pre-compose it. This is just the rain cloud image map. It doesn't really matter what we select in terms of leave all or move all because we've not modified anything, and anything we would have modified at this point wouldn't make any difference anyway. Now in here, I'm just going to squeeze these together to add some more detail back into that image map that ends up squeezed out the other way. So I'm just going to have two versions of this image map sort of overlaid on top of each other, and I'll mask one of these off and give it some feathering to blend them together. And hopefully we won't see that that point there. If so, we can go back in and feather it a little bit more. But I just wanted to add some more detail into the clouds in the background. So it looks like we're getting there. So let's start dropping some objects into the scene here, just to start filling it out. And I think at this point, and start organizing my composition. So I'm just going to drop all of my media elements into an elements folder and pre-comps into a pre-comps folder. And this is UFO shot. So let's import an awesome rendering I did in Cinema 4D. I've got two images I'm going to import here. And just to keep things short, I'm actually going to go into the process of modeling this in Cinema 4D. I mean, they're very, very simple shapes that are making this up. But one cool thing I'm gonna do, just this shows how cool you can integrate After Effects with Cinema 4D or anything that can output image mats. So notice here in the center, I've got this little strip, and I want that to be the kind of cycling, Cylon, Knight Rider kind of thing. I want something going on in there. So I'm going to duplicate one of these layers here, the RGB render, and pull a Luma matte from that object buffer that I had. So now I've got an isolated strip in the middle there. And this will be the UFO lights. Now on top of this, I'll apply just a generic ramp. So under generate ramp, I don't know why, I still look for a gradient when I'm searching for a ramp. But I just want to have a basic black to white ramp from one side to the other. Now what I'm going to do here is use Colorama. So let's go into color correction and pull up Colorama. So what we're going to do, and what Colorama does in general, is map something to something else. So we can map something like intensity or lightness to a color wheel. So in this case, I'm actually going to use the intensity, that black to white, and map that to not a spectrum, but let's say solarized blue. In fact, I'm going to add one more color point to this in here, and I'm going to modify this blue so it's not quite that heavy supersaturated blue. So what's so cool about Colorama? What I can do is have this cycle a number of times, like let's say 5 times. And I can rotate the phase input. So I can make sort of like a cycling set of lines or lights pretty easily, just using a gradient in Colorama. I'm going to add one more lighter color in here. And we're going to add some glow. Stylize glow. This will probably need to be a heavy 32-bit glow, but for right now, I'll just leave it at an 8-bit glow. Maybe we can add some star glow to get this, to punch up a little bit more shine with this. So I'm going to use like a cold heaven kind of thing. And what I want is for my Colorama to cycle the output. So I'm going to animate that phase shift right here, like that. So easiest way to do this is just to add an expression. Hold on Alt or Option. Click on the phase shift, and let's add a very simple expression here, time times 30. So as time progresses forward, it's going to make the phase shift constantly move. Time is a word that is reserved for the number of time, or the time in seconds where your playback head is. I put a little minus symbol at the beginning, so this will reverse direction. I think this probably needs to be a lot faster. 30 was just a wild guess. I couldn't actually remember how quickly the phase shift moves. And maybe one more dark color down here. Space that out. So there's our UFO. So I'm going to call this the hero. I guess this is really a flying saucer. Let's put these in our elements folder, stay organized, and our hero flying saucer in the pre-comps. Now, where I want that that mothership to sort of come in is directly above my center point of interest, and that's this camera tracker null that we defined as the origin. So I'm just going to duplicate this because we'll use this quite a bit. So this is going to be sort of a sky center position. We're going to base a lot of things off of this position right here. First thing is actually the flying saucer. So let's drop that in here. What I'm going to do is just, well, first, make it 3D. Let's parent it to that center position and zero out the position value. So now you can kind of see that our scale is radically off in terms of the units that we got from tracking, and which is only 1280 by 720. But all we need to do is scale it down a little bit, or actually a lot. Obviously, we can see that it's a two-dimensional flying saucer. Go to Layer, Transform, Auto Orient, Orient towards Camera. So now we got a nice little flying saucer hovering over the city with some blinking lights. At this point, I'd like to correct the color of the city to match what's going on a little bit better with the sky and the UFO. So this is actually very easy to do with Colorista 2. What I want to do is take the mids of this image and just push them a little bit more towards the blue side of things. In fact, let's size this up just a little bit. Brighten it up just a little bit. And I don't want to go too overboard. And another cool thing in Colorista, just to add a little bit of clarity, because, well, it is LA and the air is a little bit dirty. So I'm going to go into the pop section in the secondary color corrector and turn this up just a little bit. And I think it really helps with certain pieces of footage. Maybe just a little darkening of the shadows. And I think we're getting there. So next I'm going to add some atmospheric effects here with particular. So like I said, it's LA. The air is a little bit dirty and foggy. So I'm going to drop in trap code particular. I'm going to use that point that I used earlier, that sky center position. So let's look at the position of that. In fact, I can just select that and hit copy. I'm going to go to my fog here and go to the emitter section, and I want to move the emitter to where that reference point is up in the sky. I'm just going to make 2 keyframes for those and hit U to isolate those 2 properties, even though I don't necessarily need keyframes. It's just a little shortcut that I do. So I'll paste that position XY, and position Z is 0, so we don't even need to worry about that. So I have particles emitting outward from a single point, or actually emitting in all directions uniformly, which is the uniform setting. So let's go to box. So we're going to emit particles in a large area. Now we need a much larger box in X and in Z. We need a very slow velocity because this stuff isn't going to be moving very much. I'll expand the emitter size Y just a little bit so it kind of comes downward a little bit like that. These particles that pass closely to the camera, I'm going to want to get rid of those because smog, I should say, is kind of a cumulative thing. We see it more in the distance rather than closer to the camera. So I really shouldn't see a whole lot going very close to the camera. So I'm going to go into the visibility section and adjust the near start, fade, and near vanish. Now, we need these to be emitting from before frame 0. So I'm going to go into the emission extras and turn this up just a little bit. We don't need it all the way up. I just want a little bit of smog there from the very first frame. And I'm going to increase the particle lifespan. Let's turn this up to 7. And adjust the opacity over life. I always like to set up the behavior of the particle before I set up the look of the particle, because a lot of what goes into particle realism is how it moves, how it fades in and out, the lifespan, that kind of thing. I try to not get caught up initially in the look of the particle. So I think we're getting pretty close. I might elevate this just a little bit, like so. All right, so I'm good with that. Now let's get into adjusting the particle itself. So I'll set this to a cloudlet. Let's increase the size random, turn the opacity way, way down to something like 2 or even 1. We just want sort of a cloudy fogginess going on. I'm going to go into the color, tint this just a little bit of a kind of a car exhaust brown. And maybe you want a little bit of random opacity, maybe a little bit more size random. And let's set this to overlay a little bit with the background. Let's say like a hard light. So let's turn up the opacity till we see it. I'm going to leave this around 2 for now. Just want to add some atmospheric effects so that items that we add in terms of the UFOs and all that are going to be kind of obscured in atmosphere. Now, as you saw in the example that I had, I actually had quite a bit of UFOs out there, not just this one, the Hero flying saucer. So I am going to do this with forms. So make another layer, call this form saucers. Let's put this below the fog layer and let's solo it for now. Let's go to trap code form. And so I want just a sort of a random scattering of UFOs. And form is actually a pretty good way to do this. So I'm going to go into the base form and set the particles in X. This is going to be the number of particles or number of flying saucers in X. And in Y, we'll leave that 1. And in Z, I'll leave this pretty low for now. We can always go back and adjust. So I'm going to expand X and Z out and move this Y position up. And just for reference, I'm going to go into the particle size and just turn this up so we can see this. And I'll set the color to black and unsolo this so we can see these black dots with everything else. Now, we could have these align in a perfect grid pattern. I guess it depends on how organized the aliens are. But when I did it, I added a little bit of randomness to this. So let's move it out in the Z-axis just a little bit, expand it out even more. And I'm going to go into the disperse and twist, click on disperse, and just give a little bit of randomness. Now, it doesn't make them move randomly. That would be something like a fractal field. But if we did want a little bit of random motion, we could go into displace and turn this up just a little bit. Now, let's make this a custom particle and set the layer to the Hero flying saucer. Even though I've made this a 3D layer and moved it around, it's going to ignore all that. It's just going to look at the source material of the flying saucer comp. So I can go to Hero flying saucer. It's going to tell me, hey, it's kind of big. That's fine. And we can adjust the size of the particle we want. So the cool thing about this is that we also have the same visibility controls. So if we don't want anything, really close to the camera, I can turn that up. Now, if we don't want any fade, make sure just to make these the same value. So there's not a start fade and ending point of the fade. Okay, time to add some lasers and lightning bolts. And this is going to present a few more issues that we're going to need to work around, specifically the buildings. But let's get the lasers and whatnot established. So we've got our flying saucer here. We've got our sky center position right there. I'm going to duplicate that null object where the sky center position is, and let's rename this Hero saucer laser. And for some reason, when you duplicate nulls, the opacity gets kind of funny. But I'm going to move this down so that's at the bottom point of the flying saucer. And essentially, I want a position there where it's going to start shooting, and I also just want to keep track of where it's going to hit. So that is this position down there. So I'm also going to duplicate that one, and we'll call this round laser position. All right, so I've got a null for where it should be shooting and a null for where it should be actually hitting the ground. Just so I can have these as reference. So now I'm going to make my form lasers and make this the size of the comp. Apply trap code form. And let's just solo the form, the saucer, and now base form, we only want one set of particles in Z for now. Size these down in X. Now the particles in X, I'm going to have about 4 of these. It's going to be kind of a stream of 4 beams coming out of this. And I want to align the position with these 2 nulls. So form, one of the hard things to do with form is to align based on an endpoint, because form is always a kind of a symmetrical object with a center point. So I'm going to first align it with the top point up here with the sort of the bottom of the UFO. So I'm going to use that UFO laser position as my form laser. In fact, I'm going to connect them with an expression so I can sort of dynamically change this if I need to. So I'm going to go into the base form. We want our center X to have an expression, and I will drag this down to the position. So I'll set up all the temporary variables and all that good stuff to get that to align. And then I just want to grab the center Z from the Z position right there. So now this should be locked to the position of the UFO, but it's going to be about twice as big as it needs to be. So the amount that we want to move it back down is going to be equal to the size in the Y. So we want to move it down in the Y half the amount of the size in Y. So let's look at our expression here. So set up a temp variable, which is equal to the position, which is an X and Y value. And then we are dropping that temp X, which is 0, and Y, which is 1, into the value of center XY. So I just want to modify a little bit this temp1 variable. So up here, I'm going to say Y is equal to temp1. That's not too complicated. We're just saying that the letter Y is equal to the same value that we dropped into Y before. And we want to move it upward. We want to subtract the amount that we've got as the size in Y divided by 2. So I'm going to put this in parentheses, put divided by 2, and put a semicolon. So instead of using this variable down here, I'm going to use Y. And I went in the wrong direction. Looks like I need to, oh yeah, because I need to push it down. 0 is at the top, and the higher value, in this case 1080, is at the bottom. So I needed to add the value to push it back down. So now if I move this position one way or the other, this null, it's going to follow along. And as I add other elements like the lightning bolts and stuff, I can just use the null point to move things rather than go into each individual parameter and adjust it. So let's tweak out our lasers here. And we're going to add a little bit of distortion to this. So let's go into the fractal field and set this to XYZ individual. Now what I don't want to do is affect the particles up here. I want those to stay locked to the position of the flying saucer. So if I displace these too much, start displacing in Y and X, you'll see that they're actually going to become unlocked to that position. So what I want to do is go into my quick maps. Let's create a map here in layer number 1. We'll map this to fractal strength, and we'll have it go from low to high. In fact, I'll just use this one right here and flip it, and we'll map this over the Y-axis. So that way we have 0 effect at the top. In fact, I can do something like that, so there's no effect for a little while. Let's smooth out just a little bit. And then at the top, it's very affected by it. So I'm going to go into the F scale here and turn up the complexity. And, I said we're only going to have one set of particles in Z, but I'm going to actually have a couple. So if I add one more, set this to 2, I do need to set this size Z down to, let's say, like 1 or 2. So we've got a couple overlapping ones. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got here. So we need this to be moving pretty fast. We're going to have it flow down the y-axis. And in fact, I think what we'll do is do something like this, where the fractal is only affected in the middle. That way it's always locked at the top and bottom. So let's turn this down just a little bit. I don't think we need that much X displacement. We can also have it affect other things like the opacity. So we see just a little bit like that, and maybe affect the size of the particles. And let's adjust the color. Let's go to the particle section. Turn this to blue. It's already using the add transfer mode, which I think is pretty good. Let's push this a little bit more towards green and add some glow to this. Stylize, glow. Let's turn up the radius and turn down the intensity just a little bit. Now, I think this is going to have to be a lot faster than this. In fact, I'm going to turn this up really high. Now, keep in mind, we're also going to be laying some lightning bolts on top of this, so don't worry if it looks less than impressive right now. So, like I said, we've got these two three-dimensional points. So I'm going to lay on top of this form lasers, right on top, add generate advanced lightning. Let's composite this on the original so we can see the original stuff going on. In fact, I can turn up alpha obstacle to kind of have the lightning mingle a little bit with the form stuff. And let's go into the glow settings, push this default color a little closer to what we're using, which is more towards the green side of things. And I'm going to lock the origin and direction to those two three-dimensional null objects. And this is going to be using one of my favorite expressions, the 2comp. It seems to come up in just about every tutorial that I do, just because it's so useful. So we've got a start position in 3D and an end position in 3D, and we've got our advanced lightning, which is a two-dimensional plugin. So we need to map these two-dimensional positions to the equivalent three-dimensional position. So I'm going to create an expression for the origin, and what I want to do is get the layer here. So I'm just going to drag this down and pick whip just the layer, not the position, and write 2comp parentheses left bracket 0, 0, right bracket parentheses. And same for the direction. So that is going to be the ground position. So pick whip the ground layer, 2comp parentheses bracket 0, 0. There we go. Now, as this moves around, is going to be shooting all kinds of lightning in three-dimensional, well, sort of three-dimensional space. Now I'm going to duplicate this. I had a couple pieces of stray lightning that I was using, so let's go in here, unselect composite on original, and call this stray lightning. And let's change the endpoint. And actually, I'm just going to keep this two-dimensional. And let's turn on the rest of our stuff here. Bring this out here so it's perhaps hitting one of these buildings over here. I'm going to set this to strike too, so it actually ends at a certain point. So it's going to kind of hit that building right there. And I'll duplicate another one. I should name these Stray Lightning 2 and Stray Lightning 1. And let's move the direction over here. So it's kind of hitting that building right there. I'm really just going to kind of trim these up so they happen only sporadically. So it's shooting, and then we have some lightning that shoots over to one side, and another set of lightning that shoots kind of the other way. Now, we do perhaps want to animate the conductivity state of the lightning so that it actually is doing something like that. So I'm just going to make this a matter of following time, or maybe time times 4. And we can do that for both. Conductivity state, time times 4. Okay, so now we have to jump into getting some roto work done. I'm going to try to keep this brief because this is a pretty lengthy tutorial. But essentially, we've got this clip right here, reveal in project, and I'll set this to reveal in Finder. So I'm going to right click and select open with Mocha for After Effects. Okay, so it's going to pull everything up from the clip itself, how much of it I want to look at. I'll just leave this set to the defaults, and let's rename this the LA aerial shot. I would like to register later. Okay, so there's a number of buildings in here that I need to get. I think the most important one is going to be this one right here, and there's a couple others that we might need to do, but I'll do one for you so you can see the process. I'm going to grab a drawing tool and draw out the general shape of this building. And as we're tracking, I want to track perspective as well. And we do have pretty small motion in here. So I'm going to rename this. This will be my track layer. And I'm going to click track forward. Okay, so I've got my basic track layer set up. I've gone through and tracked the area and time that I really need this this shape to be rotoed out. As I've tracked it along, if the points have slipped a little bit, I've just gone through and done a little bit of an adjustment to them so that it holds the basic shape of the building. So now, what we have to do is draw a detailed roto shape and link it to this track layer. So I'm going to zoom in on our building here. In fact, let's move up just a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to do a detailed roto shape here. And let's close this shape back out. We don't really need this to be rounded, so I'll just square that off. And make that one a little more cornered as well. So this is going to be our roto layer. So now I'm going to select the roto layer, and I'm going to link it to the track layer. So as the track layer distorts, the roto layer is going to distort as well. Now it's not going to be perfect. We'll have to do some tweaking, but it's going to be a lot easier than manually rotoing the whole thing. So as I go through and make adjustments, it's going to drop keyframes in here and interpolate between the changes I make in time. Okay, so just made some tweaks along the way here. Nothing major, just sort of adjusting the shape as it moves along. And you can see we've got a pretty decent track and roto for this building. And we're going to need this because the laser blast needs to go directly behind it. So the laser blast will kind of start right about here and then keep going and then probably stop. So we need this chunk of the building to be rotoed out. So I'm going to select this layer. I'm going to export the shape data to Mocha shape data for AE using the selected layer. I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard. Let's go back to After Effects. I'm going to create a new layer. This will be roto building number 1. And I'm going to make sure I'm at the beginning, and I'm going to paste. Now, because I was lazy and I imported the whole clip and didn't try to trim it up to match the exact in and out points where I've gotten After Effects, I just need to do that here. So I need to go in here and figure out the exact endpoint of this clip, which seems to be 828. So if I go to 828 in my comp, 1, 2, 3. Now trim that and bring that back to the beginning. Right there. So that's the point at which I'm going to actually start the laser blast, which is right behind the building. But to get everything in the right order, what I'm going to do is pre-compose all of my effects into one composition and then have my background plate and another. So I'm going to select all this stuff except for the main piece of footage here, the background plate. So I'll pre-compose that. Pre-compose, and I'll just call this my effects. Now if I go in here, it looks like it turns on this layer that is actually supposed to be turned off. So now I've got my sky replacement, my UFOs, my lightning effects, and all that all in one composition. So now I can move this, actually I'm going to duplicate this, move it up one, and we'll pull alpha matte from the roto that I did. So I need to adjust the length of that form. So I'll go into my form lasers here. Let's set the size Y to be a little bit smaller. And because we set it up with an expression, it's actually going to adjust itself automatically. In fact, on this lightning, I think I still have it set to the default type, which is direction rather than strike, which has a definitive end, which actually seems to be the problem. So let's actually move this back down. Now it's looking pretty good. So now real quick, I'm just going to add a couple flare points up in here just to round things out. So I want to put a flare where that UFO laser position was, right there. So I'm going to create a light. I'll just leave this light 1, and I'm going to grab the position of the UFO laser position. So that's P, copy and paste that so that the lights are in the same spot. Now, the flying saucer is actually being affected by that light. I'm just going to go in here, tap AA, and turn accepts lights to be off. Now, let's drop some null light factory in here. So I'm just going to make a solid that is black. So I'm going to apply null light factory, and I'm going to select the light and the null light factory layer, select null 3D flare, and I'm going to link the existing flare to that light. So now this light is going to drive the position and scale and color even of the light. So I'm going to go in here, click on options, and I'm going to load up a flare that I did for the cinematic flares presets. I'll use one that's called Omega Man. Looks like that. Hit OK. And let's take the intensity of this down. I'm just going to turn down the intensity of the light here. And see how that looks with the composite. I'm going to push the color of the light a little closer to this sort of greenish color that we've got going on. And in here, I need to tint the color with the light. So I'll turn that up to 100% so that it'll actually tint with that color. Now to kind of obscure that bottom area, I'm basically just going to add another flare down there, but I'll make it pretty subtle. So I'm going to duplicate this one. We'll call this KLF2, and I want to align this to the bottom. So I'm going to duplicate this light, and I want to align it to where the ground position is. So let's just copy that and paste it onto that light. So I've got it down there at the bottom. And in here, I'm just going to modify the expressions so that they can change from light 1 to light 2. So let's go in here, go in here. So there, we've got another flare down at the bottom. Again, I'm going to bring this down even more because I don't want this all flared crazy. I just want something to kind of obscure that. Now, as you can see, my roto work is standing out quite a bit because it's not being affected by the atmospheric effects or any of the light factory effects. So I'm going to select these two and cut them and then paste them back into, I selected them in the wrong order, so I need to flip it back over like that. I want them to be behind the light factory effects, but not in front of the lasers and all that. So now we can see it actually blends in pretty well, even when it goes behind right there. In fact, I'm going Let's animate the intensity so it actually turns on as this becomes visible and from behind that building. And from here we can do some final color correction touches. Probably the easiest thing we can do is just drop Mojo right on top. Super easy way to add kind of a blockbuster feel. So crank it up a little bit. Maybe you want to warm it just a little bit so it's not just all steel blues and all that. And there you go. You're ready for the Sci-Fi Channel. So let me load up the final that I did, because the planned version is never the same as the tutorial version. It's really hard to think all this stuff that you got planned and think of it all at the same time. One of the cool things I added in here that I didn't cover in the tutorial was a shockwave. Now, I simply did this in particular. I did a large burst of particles from a very high number, which is 500,000, and I aligned the center point, the point here, with that sky point where the UFO was. And I just had them burst outwards. I did set the direction to disk, which basically makes it emit outwards in 2 dimensions. So basically it forms kind of a disk shape. And because I very quickly, over the course of just a couple frames, animate from 500,000 particles down to 0, we get a very short burst that kind of looks like a shockwave. And the shockwave effect really comes from going into the physics, air, and modifying the turbulence field so that it affects the position of the particles, like that. And that's really about it. It's the only thing I skipped. Did some manual roto work right within After Effects, just to save some time. But other than that, that's pretty much the scene that I made for you. So I'll make sure to watermark the footage and post this project so you can take it apart and see all the details in it. I had a lot of fun with this. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Harry Frank.
Okay, so that was fairly humbling. And while watching Harry work his magic with expressions totally makes me feel like a 3rd grader trying to sit in on a physics class, I do have one thing to add to all of this. When Harry wanted to link the null 3D flare to another light, he went into the expression to do that manually. Oh, Harry. He loves his expressions. But I'm more of a button-pushing kind of guy. So if you're like me, you can select the 3D flare layer, that's this layer here with the flare on it, and the new light to which you want to link it to, and then just go into the null 3D flare interface over here under Link Existing Flare and choose Apply Null 3D Flare. That'll switch the flare from one light to another. Aw, yeah, who's the smart one now, Harry? Yeah, it's still you. Anyway, if you enjoyed this tutorial, and let's face it, you totally did, check out Harry's site at graymachine.com, where you can find a whole bunch of awesome goodies, including free presets, tutorials, and a link to Harry's fantastic training DVDs like Complete Training for Trapcode Particular or Trapcode Form Training. Also, don't forget to check out Harry's killer Red Giant Guru preset packs, looping backgrounds for Trapcode Suite, cinematic flares for No Light Factory, Video Rock for Particular, and the very timely Holidays for Particular. When does that man sleep, I ask you? And if you're into free presets, check out redgiantpeople.com, where there are hundreds of free presets and templates for your Red Giant products. Don't forget, you can always download a free trial of any of the Red Giant plugins that Harry used in this tutorial at redgiantsoftware.com. And you can find the Foundry's camera tracker at thefoundry.co.uk. And finally, folks, we're coming to the end of our year, and we at Red Giant Software just wanted to say thank you for all of the support. We love working with and hearing from you, so stay with us on Twitter as @RedGiantNews. Hit us up on Facebook at facebook.com/RedGiantSoftware, and check out our blog at redgiantsoftware.com/blog to keep up with our latest happenings. And trust me, there will be a lot happening in the coming year. Once again, I'm Alan Rabinowitz for RedGiantTV.com. See you next time.